You guys nervous? See, I shouldn't do that because I'm
We're
really making
live.
everybody else nervous too.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the known world. And welcome to another interview of The Crown Between Two Roses. So I am Duchess Engelin, and tonight joins me.
I'm Countess Catalina Orosol, Tenakotu Katua. And tonight we would like to welcome Master Bernard Stirling, who is the Vice Chair of the SCA New Zealand, and Lord Hrolleifr Skrauti, who is the Chair for SCA Limited in Australia.
Good. Welcome. When we start these interviews, we like to kick off with an acknowledgement. So, good nobles, we come here together in a spirit of fellowship, deepening of our skills, sharing of our knowledge, and a shared interest in the search to find truth through experimental archaeology and historical inquiry. It is in this context that I, Engelin, on behalf of my kingdom, acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we gather. We recognise their continuing connection to land and culture, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. So thanks, everyone. It's very exciting to have you both. We've actually got two wonderful people from New Zealand, as well as two from Australia. So it's great to acknowledge our traditional custodians across both lands tonight, which is wonderful. So we might just kick off tonight's interview with learning a little bit about each of you and how you started in the SCA. So Bernard, would you like to kick us off and tell us how you found the SCA and how you got started?
Sure. Yeah. So friends of mine that I knew through role-playing games had moved to Wellington, and they were starting up this SCA thing. So I came along to it, and then I sort of drifted off because not much was happening. And then my flatmate started going out with this guy who just moved down from Auckland who was into heavy fighting, and that sort of pulled me back into it. And I've been pretty full on ever since.
That's awesome. How about you, Hrolleifr?
Oh, for me, I was actually in somewhat similar circumstances. I went to a gaming convention here in sunny Canberra in the middle of January when it's hot, and came outside at lunchtime, and there were these people in the middle of summer in big padded garb and metal, and we're hitting each other with sticks, and it was like, good grief, it's 35 degrees and they're doing this. They're mad. I have to know more. And sort of went from there.
That's awesome. So do you guys have any kind of persona that you've picked up through your time, and or period of time that you like to wear the garb for, or how do you describe that kind of element of your interaction with the SCA?
Bernard, so most of my stuff I try to focus around 14th century Scotland in terms of the material culture and the armour and the clothes and whatnot.
So Hrolleifr skrauti is a 12th century Icelandic persona. Iceland being relatively small, went east, and so actually most of my garb tends to be Rus from that period, just basically continued traveling east.
That's fabulous. So may I ask, what is if you had to choose one favorite memory, which I know is difficult, in the SCA, what would that be? Hrolleifr, can we start with you?
All right. It was actually long time ago, back in the late 90s, I went to overseas and visited a bunch of friends in the SCA, and just the sheer open arm nature of their welcome. They'd never physically met me before. The internet was nowhere near as developed as this, although it was, and they just would let me into their house and go to events and shepherd me around and just looked after me, and I just had an amazing trip overseas, and just learned so much about, I guess, people and culture and humanity.
That's great. Thank you. Bernard, do you have a favorite memory you want to share?
Oh yeah. Well, so one of the things that's always stuck with me was my first Canterbury Fair. For those of you who don't know, over in Crescent Isles, it's our sort of biggest annual camping event, and a lot of the active participants tend to go. And it was sitting in the Mangy Mongol Tavern with Sir Agro singing Ushlan to me for the first time, and just sitting in a tent with a bunch of people there for my kind of the first event that I'd ever been to that I hadn't run, and hearing that, and it just made me. It's been an abiding memory of the kind of, this is my people, this is where I belong.
Really lovely.
Mm.
There's a very special feeling, I think, that we get from being surrounded by the SCA, the culture of the each other and how we all interact, but as well as in this kind of amazing scenic environment with all of the medieval or medieval-esque or whatever theme that event's going for, is something very, very special and warming for those kind of moments, which is really lovely. Mm. So we've got you both here tonight because you're members of the board of directors for our two countries within Lockhart. Could one of you please explain how on earth all of the different boards interact and how it relates to the SCA board in the States, and who does what and what does it all mean? Who'd like to explain that?
You want to go first, Bernard?
Volunteer. So I guess we're somewhat like franchisees in a way, in that we've agreed to sign on to this thing that's called the SCA, and we run our corner of it to deal with the specific legal mundane requirements of the countries that we're in, but a lot of the kind of game side stuff that is not kingdom specific comes from the SCA US still. So we are, I don't know, junior partners, I guess. But we mostly deal with the specific country specific mundane stuff for New Zealand and Australia respectively.
Yeah, that's basically it. So when SCA US goes and makes a rule, we still have to be consulted and make sure that it actually can fit within our countries. So just because there's an announcement doesn't mean it necessarily comes into play in Australia. That's why, we've had different rules from time to time about how we do certain things. But essentially it's about making sure that I guess we keep the mundane side of things ticking over, so that we're allowed to go and hire a hall or a place to have an event. The insurance is there, because the reality is that although they're terrible mundane things in terms of what people don't want to have to deal with when they're at an event, if we don't have this side of the game, we won't be able to do it at all. So I guess certainly from Australia, Bernard, I don't know if it's the same for you, we try to keep our activities quiet and out of the way, so that the membership can just play and do the things they actually want to do.
Yeah, very much so.
Oh, interesting. Now, Bernard, you have been on the NZ committee more than once, haven't you?
Yeah, this is either my third or fourth time. I was trying to think about it before we started.
So what keeps bringing you back, and what would you say is different this time?
Repeated blows to the head. So, I mean, it's a desire to help all of those things tick over in the background. I mean, this is, in a way, it's something that I've got a skill set that's useful for, and that if someone has to do it, and if someone does it, then it's sort of invisible and everyone can get on with the game without worrying about things like insurance and can we legally use crossbows and all of those sorts of things. And someone kind of has to manage some of those things. Service has always been a big part of my SCA experience. It's been a big part of my experience in other clubs and societies before I found the SCA. and in a sense, someone has to do it. It's not always easy to find a huge swathe of candidates stepping up for the job, which is a shame. But I understand, it's most people don't volunteer for bureaucracy. If they do, you probably want to look at them a little sideways. So there's usually people who are sort of prepared to serve, but not necessarily. We haven't necessarily had huge needs for change over the years in the same way that Australia has, for example. We've got a much kinder legal environment in New Zealand in some regards. But, there is an ongoing need for policy development and dealing with things at a kind of corporate level. And that's some of my mundane experience. So that's something I can usefully contribute.
Thanks. Hrolleifr, is this your first endeavor in being on the SCA bod in Australia?
Yes, it's my third year of it though. So come the AGM next year, I will roll off. Not to be confused with Hrolleifr, which is my name. So it's been quite an interesting experience. One of the things that is really good about the board is it very much is a team, and it's not a group of people with big egos. It's about trying to get things done and just I guess be pragmatic and sensible and try to do the right thing for everyone.
Yeah, I understand that. A long time ago, I was also a board member at First Scan, so I have a little bit of understanding. Now, since you've been doing this for almost 3 years now, when COVID hit, I would imagine that things changed a bit for, especially Australia. New Zealand, we were very lucky. But can you tell us a little bit about how your experience in the bod changed?
Yes, I can. So we had, a what you would probably call a normal operating environment, and then we went to a point where we had to effectively shut down everything and put a pause on any face-to-face activity. We were actually quite lucky in that there'd been some work that just happened to have been going on beforehand with live streaming policies and so on. So we'd been thinking about how we might engage in this sort of thing, but that was actually focused more on having a camera at an event, to watch a tournament, a crown tournament, or something like that. It wasn't so much thought of in the space, like what we're doing right now, or the big huge things that are going on. So there's been a fundamental shift in how we interact, and if we'd had COVID, 20 years ago, before we had all this sort of digital interaction, I have no idea what would have happened to this society. I suspect we would have all fragmented and fallen apart because we wouldn't have had that ability to interact with each other anywhere near as much. So it did cause a lot of stress and heartache, especially for our poor Kingdom Seneschal and the team who are trying to deal with the operational side of things. And one of the things that from our board side, we tried to stick with the big picture policy and then not get involved in the day-to-day operational side of things, because that's when you get confusion and people coming across one another and so on. So it's been interesting and difficult, and there have been frustrations for people when we haven't necessarily, we've been learning all the time, but we haven't necessarily known what was going to happen from day to day. I was, through pure chance and not through any planning, in a work environment where I was very aware and briefed on what was happening nationally. So I was able to bring some of that knowledge to the board and make sure that our actions were complying with the mundane policy directions from the Prime Minister and the Chief Medical Officer and so on, so that we weren't going to be, at least the SCA, we're not going to be in Australia the sort of genesis of some kind of media article entitled "Medieval Group Brings Plague." That. So, yeah, that would have been an absolute nightmare.
Thank you.
You've both mentioned that your work environments have helped your time on the board. Can you tell us what kind of skills or experience you think would be really helpful things to have, or what kind of skills have helped each of you in your roles?
So, I mean, basic meeting stuff, working on projects where you're reporting back on a regular reporting cycle, standing agendas and those sorts of kind of just basic mechanisms of how you run a committee or how you run a governance group or something like that, which are very similar in business and government. And also the policy drafting has been a big part of our work. That's something I deal with in a mundane capacity. So drafting policies and making policy decisions for an organisation. So I've sort of had some experience with that. And also just the liaising with other agencies that have influence or control over you and may need to be influenced or talked to or what have you, that aren't necessarily under your control and whose operating environment is different to yours, so they're making different decisions. So you have to talk to them about why that decision isn't great for you and what you'd like to do differently.
Rolf?
Yeah, no, those are really good points, and it's similar. It's about, I guess, knowing how to interact with people in a corporate environment to an extent, or being prepared to learn quickly if you haven't been in that space before, because it's one of those things where there's a bit of a discipline and a experience to it, but at the same time, if you join in and you've got a good heart, you can get into and contribute very strongly. It's about asking those questions and really being prepared to ask why, and also being prepared to say no and stand up for the things that are important and that need to be, managed and dealt with. So I guess that's sort of one of those things. Sometimes that takes a little bit of time and experience. It can be scary sometimes to say no to people.
Yeah. And also being confident in when you don't need to make a decision, because some people do like someone to make a policy for them, and sometimes you kind of don't want to put that overhead on everyone. So sometimes you've also got to say, no, actually, we don't need to take a corporate position on that, and we don't need to have a policy about that.
That's a really good point, because if we put a position forward, and this becomes the policy in Australia Lockhart, then that is what everyone has to do. And it might be really good for that particular instance that we decided on, but there's all the unthought of, unexpected outcomes that can occur. And so it's better to, give that general strategy, but not necessarily get into how someone does it on the day, because every day is different.
Yeah. So, Rolf, you kind of alluded to this in your answer before, but what's a skill that each of you didn't have at all before joining the board that you've learnt or you've developed in your time sitting on the boards? We'll start with you this time, Rolf.
I guess probably remembering to turn on the mute button and turn it off on Zoom meetings. Yeah. At the right time.
Yeah. Yep.
Probably for me, it's more on the financial side of things. Just making sure that I'm doing my due diligence, which means getting my head around the financial stuff that other people have prepared for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that it's not just the skills that we bring to the board, but it's also often the things that you can learn from being on the board that you can take away to your other life as well. I mean, we've both talked, I guess, a little bit about the kind of corporate backgrounds that have brought skills onto the board, but you can learn those things and then you have those skills to take away back to a mundane job or mundane life if it's a role that you pick up.
Absolutely. I know that at my time as Crown and as local seneschal, and I know some of the other officers around the kingdom, like, okay, so I've done this role, but how can I translate that to my CV or my resume to, show people that I have these skills? Because it's quite interesting in a volunteer kind of hobby environment, but absolutely the skills that you learn within any of these kind of officer or management type roles are hugely beneficial to the corporate world.
Absolutely.
All sorts of things.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about being on the board is that you do see a really wide scan of what's going on, and you get an appreciation for all kinds of things that are out there. It's like, oh, I never thought about doing that, so I'll add that to my list of I'm going to do that.
Yeah, interesting. If you had to choose one accomplishment, not necessarily, perhaps you did it on your own, or perhaps you did it with the other members of your committee or board, what would your greatest accomplishment, do you think? What would that be in this term?
But for us, it would be, I think it would be just having a safe environment and being actually able to bring back some activity in Australia that's face-to-face, and that we actually managed to run the Crown event at the start of the year, just when everything went hyper pear-shaped. And I was just so impressed with all of those people that came from Queensland that literally stopped and turned around and went home or self-quarantined. Not a single person breached rules, and they'd spent huge amounts of time and effort and money and resources to come to this event. And so the fact that we were still able to have the event was a really amazing experience. But I was absolutely in awe of every single one of those people, and just showed the quality of the membership.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It would probably be some of the early COVID stuff for me, just the making the decisions about, or being involved in the decisions, I should say, about when we pulled the plug on things and what was going to be safe, and making decisions, I think, slightly in advance of the Australian authorities, and going, yeah, no, we can see where this is going, and that might not be the legal minimum, but this, going into that first festival and going, no, we can't. What we know at this stage is that it's got a long incubation period. Someone could go to a festival not knowing they're sick, and everyone could go home with the plague, and we didn't know enough. And I mean, that was really hard. And I mean, that wasn't my call at the end of the day, but being involved in that discussion was, and the thinking behind how we move forward is something I'm reasonably proud of.
Thanks. Other than this, tiny thing called COVID, which I know is pretty much taken both of your time, what would be your biggest challenge serving on the committee or the board?
For me, it's been making sure that I understand sort of the context of some of the issues that come up, and make sure that I take the time to do that research and talk to people that because if we do make a decision on something, we want to make sure that it's fully informed, thought through.
Yeah. Sometimes it's the interpersonal stuff that comes to us. And I guess one of the differences between Australia and New Zealand perhaps is that we're much smaller. So when a people issue, I guess, comes to us, whether it's something we need to make a formal decision about or not, it's very often people that you know, people that you've known for, in some cases, 20 years. So trying to put that aside and just be fair and balanced in your approach.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can imagine that's quite difficult sometimes, and because if it's a sensitive topic too, it's not like you can talk to anyone about it. You've got that level of privacy, so you've got only the committee or the board members that are part of that discussion, so it can be quite weighty, I think.
Yeah, but you do as you were saying before, both boards I think are teams, so you're not, it's not like it's me making a decision by myself. There's at least a couple of other people to talk it over with, and
And that's exactly it. We have a very wide variety of experience on the Australian board in terms of where people come from and what they know and have done, and that's actually that actual sort of spread of knowledge, and experience actually is what makes the board so useful and effective.
Yeah, cool. So can you explain, I don't know if the Australian board and the New Zealand committee work the same way, so I'll get an answer from each of you, but how does it work in terms of the structure of the boards themselves? Like, I know one of you is the chair, one's a vice chair, and how, like, Hrolleifr, you're saying that you're into your third year, but is there a set term that you take, or what are the kind of different roles that each board has? So what's the structure and how does it all work? We'll start with Hrolleifr.
Okay, so structurally we have a board with a minimum of 5 members, and there's, in the executive of the board, there's the chair, the vice chair, the secretary and the treasurer, and the secretary and the treasurer are just amazing people, and so is the vice chair, and I've just swung around looking awesome because of them. And that's fabulous, but seriously, when someone writes to the board, it will be the secretary that is the person that engages in and out. The treasurer is dealing with all of anything to do with money and works with the exchequer, and effectively we meet every month and discuss whatever comes up. But that said, as part of those are our regular meetings, but if there's a particular issue that comes up, we will address that pretty much immediately. We can make decisions out of meetings as required if it's needed, and we basically just exist to keep things moving along. So we try not to be a roadblock or slow things down. That doesn't mean we always succeed. Often we don't. We are all volunteers just like everyone else, and we all have jobs and other things, but we try our best. We're always talking on Messenger and on the email, so we've got a relatively sort of frequent chatter going on. We get to know each other over time and what we do and don't like, and some of us, I won't mention names, secretary, might be more sticklers for grammar than others. I speak English real good, but and it's a sort of a process like that. I don't have the paperwork in front of me with the exact details, but basically it's 3 AGMs. So if you come on before an AGM, you will serve the full 3 periods. The way you become a member, there's a paper that should have just come out, but effectively you would put your name up and the membership can vote at an AGM. There is a way to be sort of temporarily brought in before an AGM if we need members, and that can happen. And if that occurs, we try to go to commentary of the membership, just to make awareness of it and make sure that there's no super surprises, I suppose.
How do you guys rotate through the different positions? Do you rotate through them, or do you nominate yourselves or each other? How does that work?
Effectively, you nominate and are voted into the position at the AGM. So it's a decision of the membership.
Oh, so the membership decides if you're chair or secretary or vice chair?
Yeah, you nominate up, and it still has to be agreed by the membership as a vote.
Cool.
How about New Zealand?
So for SCA New Zealand, it's a 3-year term. We have 3 committee members. we rotate through in a fixed order. So you come on board as the secretary for your first year, you become president for the second year, and the vice president for the third year. So the idea being that if you were running the show, I guess, that you're still around for a year, you don't wind up being in charge of everything and then disappearing off into the sunset and losing all that institutional knowledge. That was the kind of theory anyway. It again happens at an AGM. Our system is set up so that if there is only one nominee, that person's voted in. If there's multiple people, that person is appointed. Saying they're voted in is probably not accurate. If there's more than one person, there's an actual election with votes cast. And so I'll be finishing up my term at this year's AGM. And we have our treasurer is a corporate officer, so they're not an elected member and they're not a voting member of the board. And the other officer that we have is our registrar. And they usually attend meetings and speak at them, but if a vote's taken, they don't vote.
So the 3 members, is that a set number, or can that get bigger?
So the committee can co-opt additional people if it needs it, but that's the sort of standard complement.
Cool. Wow, there's 2 very different ways of operating. I find that fascinating. Very cool. Do you have a question, Catalina?
Oh, goodness. I know we'll do a little, I'll ask you a little bit about your more personal SCA life. Do you have family that plays, or partners, mothers, fathers, brothers?
God. For me, this question was answered a couple of things back by my wife when she was done. But
that would be who is that?
Mistress Natalia. So you might recognise the green wall behind.
But not the puppy.
No puppy tonight. So essentially, she asked a question on the Rialto about some kind of Russian type garb, and I had a friend that had a book with stuff on it, so I basically said, I can help out with that. Sent some photocopies of some of the pages over with the bits that she was interested in, and then we just kept talking.
Oh, lovely.
That's cool.
I also met my wife through the SCA. She wandered up to our campsite at Fair and sort of said, "Hey, I'm interested in fighting. Can you show me some stuff?" And now we've been happily married for 5 years. Yeah, 5 years. Baroness Madeline Downcourt, she's fantastic, and we regularly fight crown for each other.
It's beautiful. You guys.
I know.
Oh, shucks.
I love a good romance. We have a question that's come through on the chat. What is it like having wives from other countries?
Oh.
Well, it takes a while to teach them, what we do and don't say. So in Australia, we don't root for our team, and we have bum bags if you're going to have them at all, which we don't, but they're certainly not fanny packs. And it's just things like that.
Is your wife American by chance?
Yeah, she's from Caid.
No, so am I. So.
No, not major. Just little cultural differences from different things growing up. Really, would be the main thing, I guess.
Baroness Madeline is from Australia.
That's correct.
Right? So it's not quite as much of a shock of cultures.
I don't know. I've learned a few things over the years that, I absolutely surprise me with the different cultural stuff between Australia and New Zealand. They're so similar, but then suddenly there'll just be this one thing. You're like, what? But we're the same.
My biggest SCA Australians are weird moment was at the old Canterbury Fair site. There were chuffers that heated the shower water. So first person up in the morning would start fires so that people could have showers. And I saw this guy picking up bits of wood from the wood stack and throwing them into the air and watching them bounce, and then picking them up and putting them on his arm. And he'd pick up the next one and throw it up. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? But of course, spiders are a problem in Australia that they're not in the same way in New Zealand.
Yeah, you discover how fast your reactions are. What?
That's
where is it?
How did you guys, how did you entice your respective wives to leave their homeland and come here and be with you? Or did they? Were they already here?
Well, Madeline lived in New Zealand already. She lived down in Southern Guard. And when we started dating, I flew down there every weekend for a long time. And then at some point we went, oh, well, this is a terrible idea, actually. One of us should move. And she decided to move up here rather than me move down there.
Another Darton.
I have no idea. No, I think I probably need one of those T-shirts that says I have a crazy American wife and I'm not afraid to use her. No, she came out for a visit and I guess just never went home.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's so beautiful.
I know.
So what's something in the SCA that you love to do, quite aside from all of the admin and all of the kind of bureaucracy? What's something else that you love? I think I know what your answer is going to be, Vernon, but surprise me.
Well, I mean, two things: court heraldry and fighting. Fighting's always been the thing that I've always enjoyed it, and when things have been tough and I've been feeling burnt out on the SCA, I've cut back on the other things and kept fighting, even if I wasn't doing anything else. So that's always kind of been a place of pure enjoyment for me. When, as you say, I think all of us probably go through cycles of being more or less engaged or getting a bit burnt out from doing things. But fighting's been one of those things that's always been fun and has always been my kind of lifeline back to the SCA, even if I wasn't doing a lot else at the time.
I suppose mine actually is slightly offbeat in that I actually enjoy sitting at the fire pit and getting it ready so that the fire is burnt down to coals and is at that superheated stage for cooking the roast, and that the roast is then served for everyone on time at the time when the cook wants it ready. So actually, taking it from the big lumps of wood and then doing that, and being actually quite an introvert, it means I'm largely left alone because everyone else is going off and doing all the fun stuff. But I actually don't mind that because I just watch the world go by and see all the cool tents and the garb and there's something very calming about it, and but it's focused at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. It's such an important part, especially when you're in a household or people that you camp with who like to do the period cooking. And so many times, we've got back to camp and the sun started to set. We're like, light the fire! I'm like, we're eating at midnight because we've been so slack. So it's an extremely important part of things. So yeah, it's good that there's people like you that enjoy doing that kind of thing. So that's really good.
Do you both belong to households? And if so, how involved are you in that area of the SCA in your household?
Yes. So I was a member for a very long time of Lockheil, which in a fighting sense is part of Descartes, but I've kind of wound my fighting right back just basically I'm old and fat and slow and all of the other things, but that's fine. But I'm currently actually a watchee of the Great Dark Horde.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is a fascinating group of people, and it's very much about service and many cool things like that.
Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Well, it's probably better to actually talk to someone that's a full brother or member, but largely it was a group in the US that was almost as a counterculture to the counterculture of the SCA, because it was very much people being all very important, and it was, trying to remind people to come back and remember the service aspects and, that sort of thing. So that is the world's worst explanation of it. And you won't get any better from me tonight. And I'm sure I'll be hauled over the coals later, as is only appropriate and right.
Service is what makes the SCA tick, so that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Bernard?
Yeah, so I'm technically a member of two households, I guess. My knights are Roland's household, Hounds Over Water, which I'm a member of, and my household, House Redwinter, which is mostly New Zealand people, but that was sort of really came about from a group of us that camped together and then wanted to do more with it, and rather than just sort of pitch our tents next to each other, and now we have a truckload of infrastructure all around. Yeah.
You just mentioned that you're squire to Sir Roland, and I know that you're also a Pelican. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey to Pelican, and were you protege to anybody, or how? Tell us about that journey.
Okay, so I was, so before I was Pelican, I was student to Sir Asbjorn Pedersen Marsvin and Mistress Mariana Jensdottir, who were both Pelicans at the time. But primarily the focus of that relationship was fighting with Sir Asbjorn. But I guess in terms of Pelican stuff, I was one of the people that started the group in Darton with a bunch of people who'd been in the SCA and other groups. And I think I ran almost all of the events in our group for the first 5 or 10 years of it running, as well as, being on scans when we started it up and all sorts of things like that. So Asbjorn and Mariana were kind of co-conspirators as much as anything. And so in terms of the work stuff, that was probably stuff that we were just doing together. I learned a lot about the other, the sort of non-specific peerage stuff from them. And then,
Tell us about that lovely cap of maintenance. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you hadn't finished.
Oh, so this is the regalia of the Order of the Pelican, is a chapeau, which is a probably post-period heraldic term from Fox Davies, but it's the red velvet hat with the ermine trim that you see under crowns, and that's the registered regalia of the Order of the Pelican. So when I was preparing to be Pelican and making pretty clothes and all of the rest of it, this was something that I wanted for the ceremony, so that I had the regalia for the order, and Mistress Mariana made it for me as part of the prep for that. And I've made a few of them for other Pelicans as they've been elevated.
It's very cool. Totally not any kind of period that I do, but it's super pretty.
Absolutely.
All right. What is, this might be a bit tricky. What is one of your favorite traditions that we have within the SCA? So it can be a lockup tradition or a household tradition, can stem from when New Zealand was part of Caid, or something more recent under the Kingdom of Lockhart. So what's something that you enjoy, a tradition?
Mm.
We'll start with you, Bernard.
Bother. I mean, I don't know if it's not really specific to Lockhart or Caid, but just the level of hospitality that people in the SCA show. I've been to other parts of the world and posted on a mailing list a couple of weeks in advance saying, hey, I'm going to be in your city because someone got a couch I could crash on for a couple of days, and people will just invite you into their home, give you a key, say help yourself. You can roll up to an event, people will lend you a tent, they'll lend you a stretcher, you know. I can't think of another sort of part of the world where people are so generous and giving of their time and the things that they own to otherwise perfect strangers. And it's hugely welcoming, and it's hugely just lovely.
Yeah, I really do second that. One of the other sort of traditions that I like that sort of is sort of regional is the cheers that are done, and I encountered different cheers when I Warfield heralded for the barony of Storvik, and at the end was ready to do hip hip huzzah type thing like we do in Lockhart, and everyone in the barony looked at me with this really blank look when I did the hip hip, and we do that. Oh. So yeah, but yeah, it's those sorts of I guess regional and kingdom and baronial sort of ways of having that pomp and circumstance that while it's the same, it's different, and it really makes it interesting to travel. So you're not just seeing exactly the same thing everywhere, and so it's just beautiful.
So have you travelled out of Kingdom often, and what events have you gone to? Do you have a favourite out of Kingdom event? Hrolleifr?
Look, probably the favourite out of Kingdom event that I went to was not surprisingly Penzig, and it was just astonishing. I was actually with it was 97, so there were only like 3 Australians there. It was Duke Elphin, Sir Gregory, and at the time King John of the West. And so my night sort of gave me 2 renter nights over in Penzig, which was Sir Elphin and Sir Gregory, and they kept me under their wing and got me into all kinds of trouble. But
not
actually,
surprised.
Given the very, very little West Kingdom, I actually went and participated and fought as part of the baronial unit for Storvik, which is in Atlantia, and they were an incredible and wonderful group of people. And what absolutely staggered me was that the sides were very unbalanced. And so the King of Atlantia actually asked the Storvik unit to fight for the other side, and the emotional drain it took on them because they had to change the colour on the helmet, and they'd never done it before, and they were crying, but they still did it. They kept their honour, and to give you an idea of just how hard they actually fought and retained their honour on the bridge battle. They were the last unit standing after the other 2 bridges were taken, and basically it was from both sides. So they did honour to themselves and their crown. It was just an astonishing group of people. So it's that sort of thing that you never forget. Yeah. 24 years later.
Powerful. How about you, Bernard? Have you travelled out of Kingdom?
Yes, I have. So I travelled to this event called Hrolleifr Festival out of Kingdom way back in the day. And that was fantastic, and I met a lot of interesting people and learnt about the strange West-based Lockhart culture. We did weird things different to how we did them in Caid. And I've been over to Drachenwald. So I went to Drachenwald University a few years ago because a friend of mine, Master Duncan Kerr, was elevated to the Order of the Pelican. And I'd always promised him that I would go if he got elevated to the peerage, so he was, and I did. I was supposed to go to Penzance last year to see the elephants, so I haven't done that yet. It's certainly been interesting, as you say, seeing how other people do things differently. Because court ceremony is such a big part of my game, because I do a lot of royal court. It was really interesting going to an event where I was basically there for someone else's peerage ceremony. I mean, I would have gone. The fact that it was a university was kind of neither here nor there. I mean, it was a lovely event, but that wasn't the reason I was there. And there were actually 2 elevations at that event, and just seeing how Drachenwald did it compared to how we do it, and in Lockhart now, and also how I had seen it done with Caden crowns, was very different. Because I mean, a lot of the Drachenwald ones, the person doesn't know they're being elevated. They're asked on the Friday. They sit vigil, and then they're elevated in court, often on the Saturday. So very different. Lots of advance work done around people who don't know what's going on. It's not a hard and fast rule. I know people who knew in advance. Obviously Duncan knew in advance. That's why I was there. But the person who was made a laurel at the same event didn't know. And that's quite a cultural difference. I'm not aware of that happening in Lockhart in my time. But also they do other things, like they give people their peerage scrolls when they're elevated. So, you know, that involved just how things are organised and the way the ceremonies are done and all the rest of it was really good to see. Gave me lots of ideas.
Are there any other?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask if there were any other bits of interkingdom differences that in your time in the SCA that you find most particularly memorable for whatever reason.
For me, it's mostly stories I've heard rather than things I've seen. You know, we're less formal perhaps with our kings and queens in Lockhart. I hope no less respectful, but less formal. And I know that some of my friends who've lived overseas in other kingdoms have said that it would break people's brains in some ways, the way that we interact with royalty quite familiarly, and that would just not be done for people on the thrones. And, you know, I mean, I think it's partly a just sort of cultural, you know, mundane culture thing. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting hearing about those sorts of differences can be quite traumatic between kingdoms.
Hrolleifr, do you have any interkingdom differences that you that stick out in your mind the most?
Oh, it's largely cultural aspects, like we said. I mean, when I did do that overseas trip, I, you know, took a bunny around with me, and when I went east, everyone was like, "What on earth is that tiny little thing?" Because they were hiding behind these enormous heaters, and they were like, "We're going to hit you everywhere." Okay, try, but yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, you can go, you know, one group away, and it'll be done differently. Even in Lockhart, you know, between, you know, Rowaney and Pollitt. So, you know, we all have that, but it just becomes more and more obvious the further you go.
I'm going to jump back to some board-related questions again, because we're coming up close to the end. But I wanted to get this one in here. If someone's thinking about joining the board or the committee at the next opportunity or down the track, what's some advice or encouragement you would give them to say, look, it's not that scary, come join us? Give us some advice.
come along and join. Literally just come and have a chat to, one of us individually or as a group. Much of what we discuss at the board isn't secret. So, we don't mind if someone wants to actually come along and listen in and see what it's all about. That's fine. We would love for people to, be wanting to come along. There are baronies in Australia that don't have members at the moment. We would really love for someone from some of those baronies, especially the southern barony of Innisfail and Inelgard, out to the sort of west and further west in Anyala. So please do, if you're interested, you come and talk to us.
Yes, I'd absolutely echo that, and it's not hard to pick up. It's really valuable seeing the machinery from the inside, and it's an opportunity to contribute to the ongoing sort of stability and operation of the society in a way that you don't necessarily get anywhere else. So, but yeah, if people are interested, by all means, come and chat with us. There's a lot of support. Board members, in my experience, have been very good about helping along someone who's not done that sort of stuff before, and there's plenty of people who've served on the board who would be happy to mentor as well.
That's right. Probably the only thing to be mindful of is that if you do intend to contest Crown, that you cannot be on the board and Crown at the same time. So you would have to step back from the board, and obviously we'd prefer not to lose board members because we don't have a lot of them, and if we go below quorum, that may create problems. But yeah.
But it's not a deal breaker. It's just be mindful and prepare for that possibility, right?
I think anytime you contest Crown, you've got to think about the repercussions of winning it and have a plan. If you're on the board, if you're a local group officer, if you're a baron or baroness, you've got to think about, well, if I have a good day tomorrow, even if you don't think you're hugely likely, what am I going to do? How am I going to discharge my other responsibilities? And that might just simply be having a plan.
Awesome. Kelly, did you have any final questions?
You asked the question that was the last one that I was thinking about asking. So I want to thank you both. But it's been a really interesting hour with you, and I think we've probably learned a lot about how the bod and the committee work, and it's been nice to get to know you a bit better.
Well, thank you for inviting us along.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more story each. Give us one more. Something doesn't have to. It can be funny. It can be serious. Any kind of SCA related story. Give you 10 seconds to think about it. Who would like to go first?
All right, I'm going first.
Yep.
Okay. At the old Wilton site for Hrolleifr Festival, on the battlefield, down one side there was a lot of tea tree, which was quite thick, but if you took the effort, you could make your way through it. And one particular day, we were on the bottom side and needed to get to the top side where our wonderful on-field opponents were. So we decided to go through the tea tree, and I had a glaive. So I was holding it just behind the head so that basically the cross-section was only that big rather than, an 8-foot glaive going through tight tea tree. We're going through single file, but there were a couple of rather skilled fighters from the other side that spotted us going into the tea tree, and I was the third person in line, and the first two in our little sort of raiding force were taken down very quickly, but they could only fall to about a 45-degree angle because of the tea tree. And then I was feeding this glaive through quickly, and I was very, very surprised that suddenly they were being, swiped at by a long arm in the tea tree. That was quite a funny moment until they realised that, while there was that element of surprise, there was absolutely no way I could change the direction of it because of the tea tree was meaning I could only turn this thing. I just stepped to the side and that was it. Game over for me. And then I sort of lay there at a 45-degree angle and thing, and they moved down the rest of the line.
Awesome.
My last funny story. My first festival, when we were visiting as guests of Lockhart from Caid, I fought in the war fighting, and for me that was the largest unit fighting I'd ever done, and it was a resurrection battle with sort of 5 points on the field, and the king at the time said, okay, I was on his side, and he's like, okay, when you resurrect, wait till there's a group of you, don't just go back on by yourself. Like, okay, that's good, okay, cool. So I was waiting at the rest point, the king rolls up and he grabs a group of people and says, okay, cool, we're going to the middle point. And I had a barrel helm on, so I had very little peripheral vision. So I take off at a trot to the middle of the field, and as I'm just about to engage the enemy unit from about sort of 45 degrees, I look a little bit to my left and to my right to make sure that the line is well dressed, and I realized that what's happened is that the king had sent us all to the middle point, and then he'd gone off by himself to rejoin his unit, and everyone had followed him.
Oh no.
So I was gloriously charging House Attica by myself with the glaive on the midpoint of it. But fortunately, they were engaged with someone else. So the person at the end sort of saw me, turned to face, and then I killed him. And then I just sort of worked my way down the line with this glaive. And I got most of them. And then someone very unsportingly shot me in the head. And that was that. But we got to walk off the field, and of course, a lot of the people sitting on the hill there at Yes, as you come off the war field, which is where people used to sit and watch the fighting. And so my friend and I had, being New Zealanders, and we knew that a lot of the people there knew that we were New Zealanders. We had these New Zealand patches on our St. Florian tabards. And as we walked off the field, I was bitterly complaining about this household with the black tabards with the gold cross swords on, and how they were rhino hides and wouldn't take their blows, and I hit them and they just wouldn't go down. And I got some absolutely shocked looks from participants until Duchess Constanzia gently pointed out to someone that I probably knew what I was talking about and was winding them up.
Oh my God, that is so funny.
But that was my first festival. It was a great time.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. We've certainly learned a lot about yourselves and how the boards and the committee operate. And I think, it's been eye-opening, and I certainly hope that a lot of people are inspired by your stories and put their hands up to help serve in the SCA. So it's a great thing to do, and I know that we're very appreciative of all the work that you do and that your teams have done, and all of the members before you. So thank you. It's what keeps us being able to do the things that we love to do. We get to dress up and have fun because you guys, the rules are there for letting it to happen. So that's fantastic, and thank you so much. I think we have another interview next week with our newcomers that were postponed, unfortunately, from when they were originally scheduled for. So join us then. And I think that's all I've got. Anything else, Catalina?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.